Welcome back, gang. Up till now, we have been talking about the elements of design. You had it in your last week's recorded lecture, and then we talked about it in our first class, or second class rather, and now we're going to get into the principles of design. Now, visual design principles describe fundamental ideas about the practice of design. The elements and principles, the principles are basically how to use the elements, and they are what are in your graphic designer's toolbox. These are the things that you draw upon when you need to create something awesome. So the elements are the what, and the principles are the how. All right, so we're hitting only two of them today. We're breaking this up, or I'm breaking this up into several lectures because it's kind of a lot. So first one we're talking about is balance. And we as humans have an innate sense of balance. Some people are more bothered by things being out of balance than others, but most people, almost all people, notice it. I think all of you probably can look at this picture frame and notice that it is crooked. A lot of people would need to walk up to this and fix it right now. Because we have an innate desire for stability, and we react negatively when things are not stable. And, oh, I didn't realize I had this. I have a little, oh, this is a new one. This is a new, the video I found on YouTube, and your lectures are going to be peppered with these. Sometimes I find these things that I think can say it better than I can, if you can believe that. But it's true. And I'm going to play this, and I will be back with you in a few minutes.
One of the designer's most basic visual tools is the distinction between symmetry and asymmetry.
You may be surprised to discover how much you can enhance your work by harnessing this powerful distinction. Ellen, you love symmetry. Tell us why.
Many natural organisms are symmetrical. Look at me. I'm symmetrical. My arms and legs keep me balanced. A leaf grows outward in a symmetrical pattern. The arms of a starfish radiate out from the center. That's called radial symmetry. Symmetrical layouts are inherently stable and balanced, and that's why designers for centuries have gravitated towards centered layouts. So in a symmetrical design, I should be able to draw a line top to bottom, and it's the same on either side. Or I could draw a line through the center, and it's the same above and below. But Jennifer, I know you love asymmetry. Tell us about that.
I think that symmetry is more inherently understandable because we can all relate as human beings that are symmetrical to that principle. But you may be wondering, what exactly is asymmetry? Asymmetry in design really is distributing elements so that moving them around until they really do feel balanced. So that really is a matter somewhat of intuitive perception. Nature's full of asymmetry. A mountain has balance even though its volumes are irregular. Modern architects unlocked the power of asymmetry. This building was designed by Le Corbusier in 1925. It has a tree growing up through the courtyard. These album cover designs are asymmetrical. The flush left type anchors the compositions toward the left, but there's enough activity on the right to keep each design balanced. These layouts by Rick Valicenti feature asymmetrical distribution. The layouts feel alive yet balanced. When we use the term dynamic or dynamic asymmetry, what we're really referring to is design that really moves and changes. Design in which the viewer's eye is actively moved around and through a design.
Symmetrical layouts can be dynamic too. You can vary the size of the elements, or you can crop them on the page in a way that suggests tension and movement and growth. Centered type seems like a very traditional composition, but here the designer has created centered type, but also introduced drama by shattering the type, by making it large, by pushing it together, compressing the line spacing. So the composition may be centered, but it's very active. This design consists of a central cross created out of typography. And then there is a burst of type, a disruption of type on the left side that upsets that perfect symmetry of the design. A layout in a book or a magazine is always symmetrical because of that strong central spine down the middle. Here, designer Paul Sayre has positioned a series of photographs right through that spine, right through the center of the book. And he's also created typography that plays very actively with the spine of the book. So these are symmetrical designs, but they're doing it in a way that's very active and dynamic. Here's a web design that has a very strong central axis. It's yellow on one side and white on the other. And the designer has taken his web design and applied it to a print publication. Inside the book, there's a little half sheet of yellow that becomes a kind of book within the book. So it's very centered, but it's also dynamic and playful. It engages the reader.
Symmetry is not always an either-or decision. In this poster series, some solutions are strongly symmetrical and some are asymmetrical. In every case, the designer has introduced tension and movement through contrasting colors, shapes, and patterns.
So here's a tool, symmetry versus asymmetry. It's basic, it's universal. You can look at any piece of design and ask, is it the same left and right, or is it different? I love symmetry. Symmetry is balanced. It makes sense. It relates to so many things in nature. But as a designer, we have to harness it in a creative and dynamic way, not just a dumb thing right in the middle.
And I love asymmetry because for me, asymmetry really energizes the page by encouraging the viewer's eye to move all the way organically through the page in a much more exciting way.
Okay, hopefully you derived a lot from that, and I just saved you from reading about 15 pages in a textbook because the woman on the left is the author of the book that we sometimes use in the class. There'll be selective readings from it in the course of the semester. Ellen, blanking on her name right now. Anyhow, she's a little bit of a kook, but she's definitely excited about symmetry. If we were in class, I would do a poll to see who was more of a symmetry fan and who was more of an asymmetry fan. I'm just curious. Okay, so 3 types of symmetry. The one on the right, radial, that's one that they made up in the last few years. Really asymmetrical and symmetrical are the 2 that you're going to be mostly concerned with. So symmetry, mirroring of equivalent elements on either side of a central axis. Say equal distribution of weight. You can imagine a vertical line going between the 2 elements there. We see symmetry in nature all the time. For example, a butterfly. We'll see it in design. And then we have asymmetry, which is an equal distribution of visual weight achieved through balancing one element with the weight of the counterpointing element without mirroring on either side of the central axis. So you can see that this design here definitely has balance, but it's not equal balance on either side of a central axis like you saw in these examples, where if you drew a line down the middle of that guitar or down the middle of the sky, that hourglass shape, or through that woman, or through who I'm presuming is Angelica Schuyler, you're going to get, it's going to be pretty much equal. I mean, it's not exactly equal. The women on the right and left are not exactly the same, but I think you get my point. It's symmetrical. And we see a lot of asymmetry in life as well. Here's a design that is asymmetrical. Now, to achieve asymmetrical balance, which I will contest I think is harder than symmetrical, the position, visual weight, size, value, color, shape, and texture of an element must be considered and weighed against every other mark. This is the first time you're going to hear this, that when you're designing something, everything relates to everything else. I'll say it again. Everything relates to everything else. Every element relates to every other element on the page. And so, and together, they form one balanced, cohesive whole and one clear and hopefully engaging message. Here's some asymmetrical design. Oh, that's just one example. Radial, not trying to say it doesn't exist, just you're not going to It's not going to be something you're going to be able to draw upon all that often. And radial, it rotates around a common center, and elements are equally spaced around a central point. So it's less about a line down the middle and more about a point right in the middle, probably right where that kind of green eagle scarab kind of thingy is there. Radial symmetry in life. It's a good example of a logo. It's radial symmetry. You don't see that all that often. So symmetrical or symmetry and asymmetry, using either one, there's pros and cons of using either one. And there's certain characteristics that have come to be connected more with one or the other. Symmetry often is connected with something more stable and harmonized. If you look at a lot of corporate logos, like Target's probably not the best example, it's more retail, but a lot of corporate logos are more likely to want to be symmetrical because it gives a sense of stability or suggests a sense of stability. But on the flip side of it, it also can be considered sort of predictable and boring. I have Nike there just to show you an example of an asymmetrical big time logo. Now, symmetry can create or maintain balance, calmness, and stability. It can communicate integrity, professionalism, and solidarity, in case you don't like reading. For example, one of the most famous, most of these, let's take out pretty much Nike and Apple, and Apple's almost symmetrical. And I guess the Windows one is not so much either. But the rest of those are all symmetrical logos. But, predictable, harmonious is not necessarily a bad thing. This is a symmetrical layout. Very evenly spaced, very orderly, you know where everything is, it's understandable. It's a good use of symmetry as well. It actually kind of comments on the binary between men and women. They're different sides of the same mirror, so to speak. It sets these opposing opposites against each other. So not only is it orderly, but it keeps from being boring because it's being used in an interesting way. Symmetry. Now, asymmetry can evoke feelings of movement. And hopefully our women in the video didn't go through too much of this. I don't want to be too redundant. But the advantages of asymmetry it can evoke a feeling of movement. That's why many sports brands use asymmetrical layouts and asymmetry. It's just more dynamic. It can be more playful. Can really make one element stand out more than another because you're not worrying about balancing it on exactly the opposite side. So make this point here, the asymmetrical layout automatically brings the viewer's eye to the focal points. The gaze naturally settles on the critical pieces of the design first. And that's our job as designers, is to organize these pages or whatever we're working on so that the person, it's like you have the power. You want to make your viewer's eyes go where you want them to go, in the order that you want them to go in. Every element on this page is placed thoughtfully, consciously. And the viewer's eye moves to where this designer wants them to go. You will hear the word hierarchy from me ad nauseum by the end of the course. You'll want to hit me over the head with it. But the hierarchy, which is the order of importance, is what a hierarchy is. You want the people to see the most important thing or want them to see what you want them to see, but you as the designer have to decide what is the most important thing. Now here's a symmetrical design, very symmetrical. Designers very consciously want you to look at that headline first because it's large and colorful on a white background, but they also want you to look at this. It's a bike in the middle. I know it's a little hard to see that because it's gigantic and it's centered right there on the page. Hopefully I've made that point by now. Asymmetrical design. Every element has a place, and all has a purpose. I would say that asymmetrical layouts are harder. I think they're more dynamic and they're more rewarding, as most things are harder are. Things that are more rewarding are going to be a little harder. You definitely need more time to arrange them, to figure out when I decide to not center this on the page and have it symmetrical with the picture plane. They take the type name universe on the left and tilt it and stick it up in that corner. Okay, how do I balance that? Oh, I'll put this type in the lower right with the white, and that will help balance the white on the top and bottom. And we'll learn this in other principles of design, that the diagonal is a very strong element in design, and that's how we read left to right, upper left corner down to the lower right corner. But all those things have to be thought out. Now, combination of symmetry and asymmetry are not exclusive. They can be used together. This is mostly asymmetrical, but the actual page with the cut down the center is symmetrical, but the elements that are laying on top of it are asymmetrical. And this is not something you're going to think about all the time when you start designing something. It's just to kind of make you aware of it, and it becomes just part of the language that you speak as a designer. We talk about balancing things horizontally and vertically. The one on the right, upper left corner, upper left corner is balanced horizontally, and then we can also balance things vertically. The one on the right. Okay, so that was symmetry, what we just talked about. That was our first element of design. It was our first principle of design. And now we're going to be on our second one, which is called emphasis. And emphasis is the arrangement of visual elements according to importance. When I talked about hierarchy a few minutes ago, that's part of what I was getting at. It stresses some elements over others, making some subordinate and some dominant. Visual weight. The relative amount of visual attraction, importance, or emphasis the element carries in a composition. Every element on your page has a visual weight, and the visual weights should be different. If the visual weights aren't different from your page elements, that means you want everyone to look at everything at exactly the same time, which isn't possible. So there has to be the hierarchy of what is more important and less important. The more important elements get more visual weight, the less important get less visual weight. So our first example, did I already say that? Yeah. This is emphasis through color. I should have flipped where these are. So visual weight is a system where we assign a psychological form of heaviness. This is what I was getting at before. It's not literally heavy. It's just a psychological form of heaviness. This element on the right seems heavier. It has more weight. Weight is probably the term that you're going to use more. Something has visual weight. And that's because it's larger, it's a darker color, there's more contrast with the background. There's various reasons why that is sticking out, but color is chief among them. So emphasis, you can emphasize elements through color, and the first example is the jelly bean is the best example of that. That one stands out because it is different in color. Here's a great example of using warm and cool colors. They allow the woman's face to jump out at you, or to at least be separated significantly from the background, because it is all warm colors as opposed to she's surrounded by cool colors. We can also create emphasis through contrast. This is a little more of an obscure example. I guess what I was trying to show is the way that gray screen is on top of the image of the men in the background. They're de-emphasizing that by putting that gray screen and not letting it be white in the background or close to white in the background. They're reducing the contrast there so that we're able to better read the main headline there, which is white, which is the most important thing, obviously. So this designer said, okay, what are my most important things? I've got this picture in the back, I got this headline, you got to read the headline, that's the most important. I'm going to make that pop the most. So I'm going to emphasize it through the contrast, as it sits against that background. The that amount of contrast makes it pop. So once again, all those elements are working together to create one whole. And we're going to skip that. Okay, emphasis through scale. You can make elements appear to move forward or backward on a page, depending on their relative size to each other. Once again, the elements are always seen in relation to each other. Larger shapes and forms are going to tend to attract more attention. So right there, what have we done? Oops. The larger square seems to have come forward in space, and the smaller one has seemed to move back. And all we did was move it and make it a little bit smaller, and yet it gives that illusion. You can emphasize things through use of scale, whether it's a giant foot crushing down on this human figure to create a metaphorical commentary, or it's the giant numbers on the piece on the right, or the teeny tiny Volkswagen in the very famous Think Small ad from the 60s. They're using size to create visual weight, reduce visual weight in their design. Placement matters too. In our visual perception, it's just the way our brains work, different areas of the page seem to carry more or less visual weight. The same mark positioned in different parts of the page will appear to change in visual weight because of its position. Now, that position is one of the weakest positions in the lower right, where that is considered one of the highest. When you think about how many websites you go to and the first thing you see is the logo, they place the logo in the upper left corner position because that's the most important branding element, and it's where our eye looks right away. In the Western world anyway. As I just said, here's two examples. Starting the upper left, and everything moves more or less on a diagonal to the lower right. We come back to her for another point. I'm going to come back to her. I think she's in a different section as well. But orientation-wise, okay, so vertical object appears heavier than a horizontal object, and that's more powerful, I would say, than that. But that is considered the most powerful and design-wise. It carries the most visual weight. So that upper left to lower right corner, that diagonal, is considered more powerful. You may or may not agree with that, but hopefully there'll be enough examples that you'll see what I'm talking about. Yeah, we're skipping that. Okay, emphasis by isolation. So the figure in the middle is not only larger scale-wise, but his figure is isolated from everything else by all that space around him, so it really makes him stand out. You're using that to show the viewer that he is the most important thing on that page. Similar to the Volkswagen ad, all that, you'll learn this soon enough, negative space around the Volkswagen image serves to isolate the very important car image up there. All that space is why your eye goes right to that image. The hands on the upper left are creating a frame that is isolating the Washington Monument. Now, that's why I want to get back to her. What do you think this one is? How is the designer using emphasis in this example? Well, let me tell you, Professor Gallagher, he's using it by, first of all, or is it isolation, placement, or scale? And I would say a few of them. Scale, she's gigantic compared to anything else on the page. Isolation, she's surrounded by this gold color all by herself. And placement, she's placed right in the middle of the page, which might not be quite as powerful as the diagonal, but it's still pretty darn powerful. What about this one? We have placement as well, center of the page. Scale, we have a one-sized outline figure of the hat, and then we have a different scaled image on the inside of it. So that creates some visual interest right there. We're using color between the black and white image in the middle and the yellow color. As well as isolation. The figure is completely surrounded by nothing, just the yellow color. And we're skipping that and skipping that. We already had this example, but not only is this emphasis through color, also through contrast. Contrast of the yellow and red are very different on the value scale. The red is much darker than the much lighter value. If you were to make this into a black and white image, that would be more obvious to you. And also the placement. The jelly bean is in that all important, all wonderful upper left corner. So the bottom line when it comes to the emphasis as a principle of design is that when design is balanced, it tends towards harmony. Always want harmony. A balanced composition affects the viewer and communicates stability. And that, my friends, is the end of the first part of the Principles of Design lecture. Be sure to do the quiz. It's due by the next class. Bring any questions you have to class. We will be reviewing some of these points and moving on with more design principles. And that's that. So until next time, take care.